That's what some lunatics about it again. He says he must bomb your kitchen. Playgrounds bomb for Zog. Hospitals bomb for Zog. Food trucks bomb for Zog. Press schools bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Bullets fly, white phosphorus lights the sky. Buildings are blown and the innocent die. Israeli hospital will always lie. Hezbollah can make the demons cry. Israel has bullshit to sell. Magic temples and cows, Dawson ring the bell. Demonic thoughts who'd poison a well. Israel. Playgrounds bomb for Zog. Hospitals bomb for Zog. Food trucks bomb for Zog. Press schools bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Boycott Israel. Anti-cons. Zionists keep killing babies. There's blood on the floor. Murdering psychopaths. Follow the door. For Zog. Hospitals bomb for Zog. Food trucks bomb for Zog. Press schools bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Apartments bomb for Zog. Boycott Israel. Anti-neocons. Zionists keep killing babies. There's blood on the floor. Murdering psychopaths. Follow the door.
Episode of Countercurrents, I'm pleased to be interviewing Ryan Dawson, who's been a genuine pioneer in the world of the internet. Pioneer in the sense that, boy, he got banned before everybody else. And he got banned because he has an incredible habit of telling the truth. So we will have a chat with Ryan about the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and some other contemporary issues in the world. Enjoy. So if you're expecting to see Ryan, because he is a handsome devil.
That's right.
But Ryan is actually battling a medical condition right now that prevents him from being able to look at the screen. So he has to appear in voice only, which is unfortunate for the audience because they would enjoy looking at Ryan, but even better than looking at him is listening to what he has to say. So let me start. How did you get yourself into this situation? You know, I describe you. I did an opening intro without you on, describing you as a genuine pioneer of the internet because you became one of the first people to start getting banned. Not because you were calling people racist names and saying outrageous things, but because you were factually reporting on incidents like Jeffrey Epstein, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. How did you get started with all this?
I think I was the first blanket ban person ever. Got kicked off of MySpace and AOL back in 2005. And then I wasn't given a reason. They just do it, you know? And the same thing with YouTube, they'll say hate speech, but they won't say like what I did that was hate speech.
Right.
I think you know how that is. Like they just say it. There's no one to argue with. There's no one to do appeals with. They're supposed to have a policy of 3 strikes and appeals, but they just make up the rules as they go along.
And what was the first issue that brought you their attention to ban you?
Well, in 2005, it was probably September 11th. I was talking about that, not in a kook way, but in a real way.
Right, right.
You know, about the incompetence of the intelligence agencies and so on. And they didn't like that at all.
And then
because I didn't start on Epstein until 2007.
So,
that definitely got me in a lot of trouble.
well, and the work that you've done on both the assassination of John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy, I think, are really it's remarkable. It's not you're not one of these people who's overwhelmed by emotion and concocted a story. You deal with the facts. And
I wasn't alive when either one of them were murdered. I remember seeing the Zapruder film in 5th grade. My teacher, Mike Finnegan, pulled it out. First person I ever saw die. Although technically he didn't die there. He died in the hospital. But he said everybody who was alive at the time remembered where they were when they heard Kennedy had been killed.
Yeah.
And I guess my generation, that was September 11th. Everybody knows where they were when the towers fell.
Yeah, because I was in. I'm an old guy, so I do remember. I was in 3rd grade, and the emotional impact. In fact, I think we were let out of school that day in the afternoons. We closed it early, and then we were out of school for the next couple of days. So it had a nationwide impact. What led you to start looking at the assassination of JFK as something that needed to be explored?
Well, that day when I was 10 years old and I saw that, he'd said a lot of people believed there was a conspiracy. There was another shooter. I don't remember who I asked, but I realized there was more than one investigation. There's the Warren Commission. And then later there was another investigation in the 70s from the House Select Committee on Assassinations that did determine 2 shooters based on acoustic evidence.
Right.
And so, I had to talk to my parents about it, and I'm still in 5th grade. There's no internet yet. So I was just curious about it. And then I guess around when I was in middle school, the JFK movie from Oliver Stone came out. And I remember seeing that. Very entertaining movie. Got a lot of things wrong. But that sort of reinvigorated a public interest in JFK. So everybody was talking about it. And I would talk to anybody who was interested in it and who had read books about it, trying to gather information. I must have studied that for 2 decades. Once I had the internet, I was able to get access to the Warren Commission report, to Garrison's whatever I wanted. It was all online, except for the obvious classified things.
Right, right.
And then by luck, I dated a girl whose grandfather was head of the Yamaha division in Texas. And I was at her house, her father's house, on New Year's, and he had just sold the company and made whatever millions. And he was close associate of LBJ. He sold him his speedboat, the fastest boat there was in the Gulf of America, whatever, Gulf of Mexico. And used to talk with him and stuff. So I never knew what was going to be relevant, what wasn't, but I would just talk to everybody. But anybody who wanted to talk about JFK, it was like super interesting to me. One of the most interesting puzzles, because the whodunit is such a fascinating mystery because he pissed off everybody. Big Oil didn't like him. The mob didn't like him. The CIA didn't like him. MI6 didn't like him. The Israelis didn't like him. He made everybody mad. So it took me a while. I probably went down, every theory there was, I looked at it. But the one that made sense to me, especially when you put it together with his brother's death, the one that has overlap was definitely the Israeli angle.
Yeah, if people have not seen the movie you've put together, it's called NUMEC, NUMEC. NUMEC, you can find it on Rumble.
Yeah, Nuclear Material and Equipment Corporation. And, and I credit people in that movie like Grant F. Smith, who's, I think I put him in the film 3 times, and Roger Monson. They wrote a lot of books and did the FOIA requests and lawsuits and stuff. So I just had to go look at what other people had dug up for some of that film. The Sunborn Institute and Epstein and all that is something you would not be able to know unless you already knew a lot about the mob, which I did. So I was able to gather it all and connect it to Kennedy.
Well, and all this is relevant now because of the recently released Kennedy file, the supposed release of all the Kennedy files. I don't think it is at all been completely released.
No. It's the release of the files that went before the 92 review board only.
Yeah.
And just from the FBI, not that the CIA hasn't released anything.
Yeah. See, in fact, the CIA files on Lee Harvey Oswald are still being kept secret, and those need to come out. When Ryan first, when you first presented the explanation, because I'm not going to call it the theory. I don't think it is at all a theory. I think you've established a reasonable case that John F. Kennedy was killed by the motive was the government of Israel wanted him dead. The mafia, both Italian and Jewish, wanted him dead, and elements in the CIA wanted him dead. And
elements in the CIA pretty much worked for Israel and still do now.
Yeah, we're talking James Jesus Angleton at the time.
Yeah, James Jesus Angleton there's some files that recently came out about him, but we still don't have all the files from Angleton. But he lied to the Warren Commission. He lied about, we didn't know Oswald. And that's just not true. They've been monitoring him for 4 years. And George Joannides also lied, and Richard Helms lied. And he was the best of the 3, but he lied to him too.
Well, yeah, and let's point out that when you first were presenting all of this as the explanation of what happened, there was no supporting documentation in the public yet. Yeah, these documents did exist, but what came out a couple of 3 weeks ago, I guess now, it shows that Angleton was circumventing the policy of John F. Kennedy with respect to the development, Israel's acquisition of a nuclear weapon, and he was working to help Israel do that. Correct?
That's right. And there were files. They knew that Israel had stolen highly enriched uranium from Apollo, Pennsylvania, but a lot of those files from John Hayden and who went and tested the flora and fauna at the behest of RFK, they found 97% enriched uranium, which only existed in the U.S. Nautilus program for nuclear submarines. So it had to be from the U.S. There's missing uranium from Apollo, and Zalman Shapiro and these guys are all the same crooks that are circling around Jonathan Pollard and known Israeli spies are running this operation. But that didn't get declassified till 2015. And the information about Reuben Afrin didn't get declassified until 2023. Although people like myself had been saying it, now there's an authoritative source. There are other ways to figure these things out, but it sure does help when you don't have time to explain 2 hours to somebody. Just go, here, this document is Angleton admitted it. And Reuben Afrin was one of these guys that Angleton was running. There were a lot of expats from the Soviet Union, Russia in particular, Jews, that were going to Israel. And he was getting information from them about daily life. And he ended up hiring a couple dozen of them. And Afrin was one of those. Like, why are you using the Israelis to spy on Oswald?
Well, yeah, that was the one. I had not paid much attention to this, but then when these documents came out, and because Oswald was always the mystery because how does a kid, he was only
He's like the most interesting 27-year-old in the world.
right. Well, exactly. That goes off to Russia, renounces, or the Soviet Union, renounces his U.S. citizenship, and then gets back into the United States with no problem.
The Russian wife.
Yeah, with a Russian wife, exactly. And it turns out, and this is the connection to James Jesus Angleton, and I think a lot of the media were getting this wrong because they kept saying, "Oh yeah, he had a file on Oswald," as if the CIA was watching Oswald because they realized he was a threat, and that wasn't it at all. Oswald had been recruited by the CIA, by James Jesus Angleton, and the operation he worked on called Operation Redcap, to become a defector, to go to the Soviet Union in hopes that the Soviets would pick up on him. He would be able to penetrate Soviet military intelligence or the KGB. It didn't work out that way, but when he came back to the States, he was still in contact with CIA, with the intelligence community. Explain that connection.
Yeah, he was. And Angleton, well, counterintelligence, which Angle was in charge of, they had a base south of Miami University where they ran the JM Wave program. And that's with the blonde ghost, Ted Shackley, who's a total Zionist, and Dave Morales is another character. And so another thing they were trying to do in the false defector program is, they dangled it. He's called a dangle, like try to take the bait to the Soviet Union, but also the Cubans, if maybe we could get them into Cuba. Yeah, but I think they were just setting him up because they had they called them students, whatever. That's what they called them. These Cuban students that they were going to use to attempt to get rid of Fidel. And later it would escalate into the Bay of Pigs, which everyone saw. There's shipping weapons there. And they really got in bed with some nefarious characters, including well-known mob figures like Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana. And Oswald was associated with these Cuban students, and he's in this Fair Play for Cuba committee, and he's going on local TV and talking about Marxist-Leninist propaganda, stuff like very visually, like, look, this guy's a communist. You should. But the Soviets had already seen through that. And so the Cubans aren't going to fall for it either. So Oswald had found himself he became an expendable. I mean, they put all this effort into him as a dangle and it failed. But what they could do, what one element of the CIA wanted to do, was make him the patsy for killing JFK and blame it on the Cubans. But LBJ and others were like, no, he's not going to be connected to anybody because we don't want a war with Russia. He's just going to be a lone guy that did it all by himself and no mob connections or anything. So part of the reason this sloppy operation worked is because there were people in the government who were afraid if he is connected to the Soviets or the Cubans, we got to act like he isn't because we don't need that would force our hand against the Soviet Union. And we just had avoided a nuclear disaster in the Bay of Pigs. So we're just going to pretend. And Johnson even told people, I want you to come back and show me he's a lone gunman. That's all he wanted to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that wasn't his motive. He already knew it was the Israelis. And he was like, we're not getting close to that. So all the hoo-ha, Fidel gained nothing by killing Kennedy. He had a backdoor channel with him. And it's not like LBJ was any softer on communism than JFK was. Fidel would gain nothing, but the CIA would gain if they could just pen it on Fidel, because there was a group that was hell-bent on invading Cuba. And McNamara, and these are the people that wrote up Operation Northwoods. I'm sure you're familiar.
Right.
Operation Northwoods, the one that everyone knows was the false flag attack that they were going to do in America and blame it on Cuba. But there was actually like 7 different plans, all of them more and more ridiculous. And that came on Kennedy's desk 2 times. And he said no and fired a bunch of them. Paul Nitze ends up going to the Aspen Institute and then working for NATO later. But he was the worst of that bunch. But yeah, you had some real crazies that were trying to create a pretext to invade Cuba. And Kennedy, I mean, at first, I guess he learned after the Bay of Pigs, we're not doing this. And he was really trying to negotiate a nuclear freeze. He even had the French on board with de Gaulle, and they tried to kill de Gaulle too. And, you know, they knew that Israel had a secret nuclear program, and that they had stolen highly enriched uranium from the United States, that it was in Dimona. They're demanding inspections. And Ben Gurion and Kennedy, John Kennedy, have these letters back and forth. You can go read them. They're all online. Ben Gurion's constantly changing the subject, and Kennedy's going hard. He's like, no, you guys, you SOBs always lie to me, is what he said about him. The sons of bitches always lie to me. And they had a little moratorium. Ben Gurion resigned as a way of creating a delay. And a month later, someone killed JFK. But you could hear the mob. Like, there's a famous document where they say we have new Jewish backers. And then you look, I mean, you just look at it. Jacob Rubinstein, who was a gun runner to Cuba, by the way, with Roselli and the Trafficante at the Tropicana Club, is admitting to the Warren Commission, like, there'll be a program on my people. I can't say what I need to say. And you look at his defense counsel, and it's like all mob.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can't say this in front of him. He goes, that's your lawyer. Yeah, he's not my lawyer. That's what he said.
But to make clear to folks listening that Jack Ruby's lawyer had an extensive ties to the mafia.
Yeah, Earl Warren's run for governor in California was financed by the mob. There was like Arnold Smith and the same people involved with killing Robert Kennedy, Frank Donaramas and those guys. They financed him, and they gave a lot of money to Nixon too. So, and another thing Kennedy was doing, aside from inspecting Dimona, was right of return. You know, there were UN resolutions passed that Israel just ignores, but Kennedy was taking it seriously. He's like, you forced these people off the land in 48. And back in 48, they were saying, we'll let like 20, 30,000 return, not 100,000. By 1960, that was over. They're not letting anybody in. And both Kennedy supported right of return. He also wanted to register the American Zionist Council, which used to be called the ZOA. They changed it to AZC, and now it's APAC. But he wanted to register them under FARA, which means they'd have to disclose the fact that they're foreign agents and who all they're giving money to, which is like everyone.
Yeah.
Well, they recycle American aid back into lobbying, so it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, what we're talking here, and again, people just, that's just a conspiracy theory. No, these are not theories. So
it's written down, we have the letters, like he did it.
Yeah, these are facts that Kennedy was not seen as a pro-Israel, by his actions, by his policies. He was not seen as a pro-Israel politician, just the opposite.
He supported Nasser in Egypt. They didn't like that very much either. If you look at what LBJ changed, the only policies he really 180'd on was Middle East policy towards Israel.
Right.
And Johnson was such a Zionist. Of course, he was sleeping with Matilda Krim. Her husband, Arthur Krim, worked for Johnson, but she was an Irgun terrorist. And, during the 6-Day War, there's the attack on the USS Liberty. He said, I want the damn ship on the bottom of the ocean. That's what Russ said, he said anyway. And then he put a gag order on the survivors. Why would you put a gag order on the American sailors that survived? I don't want to embarrass an ally. That's not why. But why would the Israelis attack an American ship? Well, that intelligence ship would have come back with the information of the mass graves and the civilians they've been bombing in Egypt. And the signal intelligence proves the Israelis knew it was an American ship. I don't have to make that argument. Like Liberty survivors will go on shows and tell you all about a big American flag, da da da. As Jim Ennis is good on that. They knew, but there's no way they would ever do that without a green light from Uncle Sam. But they had that with LBJ. He gave Israel anything they needed.
Yeah, and see this, immediately to when you raise factual issues, such as one, Israel's acquisition through theft of nuclear material to build the first nuclear weapon, which Kennedy opposed and was trying to stop. Then you carry that on into Kennedy's policies of supporting Nasser in Egypt, mm-hmm. and promoting the right of the return of the Palestinian people. These are not disparate facts. And then the efforts to crack down and prevent the organizations tied to Israel from interfering in U.S. domestic politics.
He's the last president to do that, by the way.
Yeah.
To ever talk about Farah.
Yeah. So that when you put all that together, there was a definite motive. Israel wanted him dead, but Israel didn't do it on their own. And you had, as you pointed out, the cooperation of CIA, as well as the mafia. It's not just Italian mob, the Jewish mob, Meyer Lansky. Well, can you just...
And Jake Lansky, too.
Yeah,
the Lansky brothers and the Marcello brothers. Carlos Marcello's the main, and then Joe and Pete. Pete ran a bar called the Show Bar on Bourbon Street that he was friends with Jack Ruby. I mean, they have phone calls back and forth. So that's for those that don't know, the Carlos Marcello's the mob boss of New Orleans, or really Louisiana. Santos Trafficante ran Tampa, but he was liaison to Cuba. He had properties over there. And a lot of mobsters, like you mentioned, Meyer Lansky, or the brain from New York, had casinos and hotels that Castro shut them all down. They probably lost $1 billion with a B dollars in revenue. And so they take over
and that was
Vegas
back in $1960, right?
Right. That would be whatever, 10 times that.
Yeah, a lot more today.
Now, Santos Trafficante was only shut down temporarily and get some of his businesses back because he was being a double agent. So some of the reason why the CIA's Mongoose operation and things failed is because Castro is being tipped off.
Well, the other, and I'll go into this in a different, in another episode of Countercurrents, but Lee Harvey Oswald was not the man that fired the shot that ultimately killed Kennedy, the headshot. We've always been led to believe
basic trigonometry it wasn't him.
Yeah,
he was as he said he was. I'm just a patsy.
Yes, he was by virtue of having been a CIA asset. That he was recruited by the CIA, and it made sense because when he was stationed in Japan at Tsugi Air Base, which was where CIA ran the U-2 program. Mm-hmm. I think that's where he first came to the attention of the CIA as a potential recruit. They recruited him. He was sent overseas. Didn't work out. Came back. But when you look at, we've got two real critical pieces of evidence, and everybody's gonna say, "Well, yeah, they killed Kennedy from the grassy knoll." No, that headshot didn't come from the grassy knoll. But when you look at the Zapruder film, the right temple of Kennedy explodes open with a flap of his skull flipping open. You see that on the film. And lo and behold, that matches up exactly with the autopsy photos. Then when you look, as Ryan said, with the trigonometry, from the position on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, if you draw a line down to where Kennedy was when he got shot, if Oswald had fired that shot, it would have entered the back of Kennedy's head and exploded out on the left side of his face. That's not what happened. Where the hole is, and then where the exit wound is, and you trace that back, it's an angle that appears to go to the Texas jail, which is about a 20-degree off center. I'm getting, I'll put this all on paper.
There were people seen there too.
Yeah, there were. So this is why Oswald was a patsy. He was set up as an excuse, and I guess later they decided he was just a lone nut.
Yeah, he's. It's sad because he realized what was going on, and he wasn't just some ordinary dude that got set up. This guy worked in Office of Naval Intelligence. That's why is he making his jailhouse phone calls to Oni? If he's just some guy. He knew David Ferry. They're in the Civil Air Patrol together, pictured at barbecues together. And Ferry knew Ruby. Ferry knew Guy Bannister and Clay Shaw and that whole group that followed Oswald around from Louisiana to Texas. George de Mohrenschildt helped set him up, knew his wife, helped him move there. Just weeks before the assassination, he just happens to get a job in the building where a shot's taken from. He's like, naturally, if I work in that building. But if you listen to Oswald, the moments he got to talk to the press, the first words out of his mouth were not, "I'm a patsy." It's, "I want a phone call and I need representation." He wanted to say everything he knew to somebody because he knew they're going to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let's point out that one of the interviews you did, people you tracked down, and most people are not aware of this. Oswald's first and only night in jail in the aftermath of this assassination was he tried to make a phone call. So who did he try to call?
Tim Hurt, probably his handler. Is what makes the most sense. And in North Carolina, which is suspicious because the official story on Oswald from like the JFK movie, which by the way, I have to point this out, their largest Israeli arms dealer, Arnan Milchan, is the executive producer of the films. They didn't mention Israel at all.
Yeah. And
they scoffed at the mafia. They're like, the mob couldn't cover this up. Like, yeah, they could. And they don't have to when the mob and the CIA had liaisons in the mob. That's they were worked a lot. This goes way back, like Doug Valentine pointed this out. The mob, as long as their supply side was a faction that was benefiting U.S. interests, like fighting communism, like KTM in China, for example, they just let it go, look the other way. Because they're like, if they're buying drugs from the right cartels and people that are, fighting communists, look away. And the mob realized this. Like, if we associate with them, they won't prosecute us.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kept, they found their niche. And even like Pablo Escobar and stuff, they realized, just yell at the communists a little bit and they'll leave us alone. But anyway, back to Oswald. Yeah, they're like, why? Who's he calling in North Carolina and why? And somebody in the government. He's supposed to be some 27-year-old communist that just killed Kennedy because he's a dirty, rotten, yellow-bellied commie, right? He wasn't just some guy that worked in a book depository store. He'd worked with, not just in his military career, but he had always worked with government and intelligence agencies, including JM Wave. And I'll point out that George Ioannidis was the chief for Psych War Department in Miami. Now, George White was the head of the whole thing. And George White used to travel back and forth from Cuba to Florida and get a ride to the airport with Jack Ruby when he would go visit Traficante. He ends up not the head of, but he's in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics with those guys. And they did some weird things with LSD and whatever. But as head of chief psych warfare, the first conspiracy theory they put out after Kennedy was shot is Oswald's connected to Cuba. The Cubans did it. The Cuban. That's what they wanted.
Right.
And then, like I said, they shut that all down. But it scared everybody. They're like, oh, don't look at it. Let's just say Oswald's a lone gunman. And that was perfect because it gets the Israelis off the hook. You just say it's the Soviet Union or, the communists, then they don't want it.
Well, and that phone call to North Carolina that they tried to make, and it was actually intercepted and prevented from going through, would have connected him to this person, John Hurt, who you tracked down, spoke to, interviewed, and then discovered that Hurt was just a cutout, correct?
Hurt was cut out. There's another guy. I told you his name, but I don't want to say it on here because I've
Yeah.
got enough heat.
Yeah.
Who I met his son, who just told me everything. It was down somewhere in the Outer Banks, I'll just say. And I was like, this sound, I don't know how sure how do I know this is true? But he did tell me also about Eric Rudolph and how he was living in Asheville, the Olympic bomber, pipe bomb. And that turned out to be true. So I went back and talked to him again because he was telling me all these names and the mob and this and that. And at that time, I was like 17 or 18. I just couldn't follow it all. I didn't know enough about.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, when I think I called you up, because when I had not even heard of the phone call until about 3 weeks ago. I haven't really delved into this like you have by any stretch. But when they talked about this secret base in North Carolina, well, hell, I've been there. I've been trained. When I was at CIA, I went to that particular base. The people who have not been involved with classified activities, who've not been involved with CIA, a lot of them described it as Nag's Head. Well, I knew that wasn't true. I knew precisely where it was. And so I went, wow. You not only talked to Hurt, but then you talked to the individual who worked out of that base. And that was this particular base was set up in 1961 as a joint CIA naval facility. And it's remained classified to this day. You can find it on a map. And
so it's Site 39, and the other one in Miami is Site 25, I think. Right. I don't know what the number, what that's in. Maybe but that's how they put them.
I know, and I can't say. So
yeah, if I did, I'd play stupid.
Yeah. So that's where we get the tie-in with the intelligence, and that's part of what came out with these Kennedy documents. Again, as you emphasized, this is not the release of all the material. This is just what was gathered by the committee in the 1970s to investigate.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was because the Zapruder film was released in 75. And now this is interesting because the prior chief of Psych War Department was C.D. Jackson. He ran it at the end of World War II and did the Buchenwald propaganda and stuff. He owned Time Life magazine. So they would only release stills, photos from the Zapruder film, but not the film. Mm-hmm. It's not until he died that they released the film. And then everyone got, that comes out in 75. And because of that, there was FOIAs issued, and that's where we got the photographs for the RFK assassination too, showing too many bullet holes. With Thane Caesar shot RFK. And I've been over that one too. And he was in the mob. He was an expendable. And that's the thing. It's not that exciting. Like, who shot Kennedy or who shot John or who shot Robert? I can tell you. And then you're like, who's that? And I go, exactly. It's nothing cool. It's just a loser. And yeah, when you look, if people are curious about Daley Plaza, I mean, there were mafia hitmen at Daley Plaza. What do you think they were doing? I mean,
it's a good vacation spot.
Yeah. And that's, that's funny because, do you know William Harvey? You heard he was the head of the assassination program.
I know the name.
Yeah. He freaked out one time in the White House. He was 6'2" and big fat dude, kind of like the kingpin or something. And and this is in the 60s when people didn't drop a lot of F-bombs. And he turned to Robert Kennedy, like right at his face, screaming, he's like, if you fuckers hadn't messed up the Bay of Pigs, you know?
Yeah.
And so they sent him to Rome. But he took a flight from Rome to Dallas. And so like, what are you doing? He's like, it's a nice, I'm just looking around. It's a nice vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his excuse. And that is verified by his, his cohorts in Rome, in the embassy in Rome.
Yeah, so the murder of
guy's name is
John F. Kennedy was let's call it a collaborative effort between the government of Israel, Mossad, the Central Intelligence Agency, and a criminal organization. We call it the mafia, but it wasn't just the Italian mob. It was the Jewish mob as well.
Italian and Jewish mob had been working together since Lansky took over for Lucky Luciano. I mean, it was the Italians did favor other Italians, but they had no problem working with Jews and vice versa. It's usually the Italians, Anastasia, and those guys later, maybe Skinny Razor, that would actually kill you. But the contract killing and the money being procured, usually $150,000, which back then is a lot of money. That was the Jews.
Well, and then this doesn't stop with the murder of John F. Kennedy, because the mob was angry with the Kennedys because they had they were betrayed.
Hoffa was in jail. Yeah.
Yeah.
They hated him.
Yeah. Explain the sort of.
Robert Kennedy, people have to know he's the head of the Justice Department, and he's on film grilling known mobsters. I thought only little girls giggled, Sam, like talking about Giancana was an underboss, then later a boss. He used to work for Capone as a wheelman. And he and Giovanni Roselli, whose real name is Philip Sacco, doesn't matter, but they were working for the CIA and they were training Cuban expats. And the Kennedys were messing it all up by going after the mob. CIA has to step in and be like, whoa, not these guys. And Robert, he let Roselli go. He goes, okay, but don't you ever decide to work with the mob without informing us again. Roselli, when Giancana was murdered, they shot him in the mouth to tell him to shut up. As this new Kennedy investigation was going on, they were in trouble from scandal called the Friars Casino scandal. He had a spy hole in the ceiling. He was cheating in cards and gambling. He was like, I can't go to jail. Like, I work for the CIA. And so he was threatening them like, I'll say everything. Because he had run his mouth and said, Ruby's going to get rid of Oswald. Don't worry, he's one of ours. And talking too much. And they were afraid that he basically would plea bargain. He would like trade information to get out of the Friars Club scandal. And it's funny because Grant Cooper, the lawyer representing a lot of Johnny Roselli's cohorts in that case, ends up being the head counselor for Sirhan Sirhan. And he got in trouble for grand jury tampering, and the co-counsel that becomes the head counsel after that, Russell Parsons, was defending Sirhan, but all he's really doing is limiting the investigation, saying it's all him, not us. What had been investigated by the head of the Senate Racket Committee, which at the time was Robert Kennedy. So that's who's, and how did Sirhan pay for all these highfalutin lawyers? He didn't. Right. They were that most likely paid by Ramostella, and he was getting his money from Arnold Smith. So John Alessio too. John Alessio got a lot. He was a fixer, cleaner upper. He's the one that got Thane Caesar out of jail in Tijuana, and that First National Bank in San Diego hired Ace Security, which is hired Thane Caesar for all of the day, on June 4th, and put him in there, and he assassinated Robert. But you see the bridge between RFK and JFK's hoodlums, where they blamed a Christian Palestinian on the second shooting, some Russian guy or pro-Russian commie for the other one. It's not what happened. Uh, and I think today nobody would like argue, oh, would the Israelis kill? Oh, yeah, Israel, they'll kill a baby. I mean, these people have no shame. They're dropping bombs on apartments right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, and let's point out that you're not saying that Sirhan was not in the kitchen when Kennedy was shot.
oh, he's there. He's a gun. He belongs in jail. But they even put a paper in his back pocket about Israel and Palestine. It was do it or else, you know, it's you or your whole family. And he was $28,000 in debt. Get this. So he worked at the Corona breeding farm for Frank Dotaramas.
Yeah,
but before that, he was at the Santa Anita racetrack.
Well,
he's a mobster from New Jersey. But
yeah,
the Santa Anita racetrack at his grand opening, some of the money to open that was from Johnny Roselli and Jack Ruby.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jack Ruby helped set up the racetrack that Sirhan was first working at. He got moved from that one. He worked at 2 racetracks, and then the Corona breeding farm where they got the horses for the tracks. Ramastella and John Alessio had this gambit where they're using the gambling at the racetracks to launder money. And one of the things they do is he had another track in Mexico, but where it's not illegal to gamble, but it is in the US. But he would just take bets on US races in Mexico and then use that bank from Smith to launder the money. But it was a way of getting paid too. Like you could purposely lose money at the track, and it was a way of paying people money owed for something illegal.
Right.
Yeah.
So explain the motive then for killing Robert F. Kennedy.
Well, the main motives were similar to JFK. He supported right of return. He supported going after the lobby. But I think the scariest thing is him investigating his brother's death,
right?
Which he had just started doing. He'd always said, I just trusted the Warren Commission. He was really damaged. His brother was murdered. And he knew. He kind of felt guilt, I think, because he had put Hoffa in jail. He did send Carlos Marcelo to Guatemala. He was going after the mob. He knew how dangerous they were. They'd messed with his father, Joe Kennedy, before that. Philadelphia ran him out. And so maybe he just didn't want to see it because he's kind of like, they killed him and I was hitting the beehive or whatever. But Garrison had Garrison's investigation was kind of meh, but they didn't know what he was going to come up with. But the fact that they bugged his office, like, why would you do that? Why do you need to know what he knows?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you scared of? So Robert Kennedy had just spent about a week where, 3 hours locked in a room going through leads. We don't know what he knew, but I think he figured it out. And he won the California primary, largest state in the union then and still. So it looked like he was going to become president. And I think if he had lost that primary, he would have lived. But since he won, they took him out that night because he said, let's on to Chicago and let's win there. I mean, by midnight, 5 minutes after midnight, they shot him 3 times. And
talk about the evidence, because people say, "Oh, this sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory." No, this is not conspiracy.
I mean, look, if all you knew is like Sirhan's there with a gun, he did it. Like, well, I can point to prior assassinations. We have 2 shooters, one's a diversion, one whatever. But the problem is Robert Kennedy. First of all, Sirhan had a .22 caliber revolver that shot 8 times, but there's 13 shots. He did not have a second gun, and he didn't reload it. So there's too many holes. You've got 5 bystanders hit, and then you've got RFK hit 3 times in a hole and through his jacket. But then there's 2 holes on Sirhan's side of the room. He's not shooting backwards. And another hole near the floor, near a door jamb. And in 1976, through FOIA request, we have photographs of the holes, and we have photographs of photographs. It's a weird thing where they circled and numbered them 7, 2, 3, something. We have witnesses too. There was two people who were just there who saw the holes and also saw a bullet.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was an FBI agent who was there, who was not only like there, he was there when he was shot. And he saw both holes and both bullets. And the guy's name was Baxter, the head of the very prominent people all witnessed this. And it's, okay, it's photographed. It doesn't come out till 1976 is the problem. He shot in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
So they, unfortunately didn't have it quite. But yeah, and then the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, and a guy named Wolf, they both looked at the police examiner, determined, and this is very damning, not only do you have the wrong angles and ballistic evidence is way off, there are burn marks on the back of Robert Kennedy's head below his right ear, powder burns. So when you shoot a gun, if you watch it in super slow motion, it's a little bit of powder goes out and then a flame and then the bullet.
Yeah, muzzle flash.
Yeah. There's a fancy term for it, but I don't know what it is, but it's like the stelling or something like that. And the cannulars were off too. One of the bullets that they pulled out of a guy named Wiesel, it was in his stomach, had 2 lines, and the one pulled out of Kennedy only had 1. And usually when you buy a clip or, loading, even if you're loading a revolver, they're uniform.
Yeah. Yeah. It just shows that it was probably from 2 different guns, correct?
Yeah. It's 2 different, same caliber gun, but different cannulars on the bullets. Bullet in Kennedy's head, it almost goes, it's from behind, but almost sideways. Like someone just put the gun right up to his head and shot him. And Sirhan shooting from the front cannot hook a bullet around and hit him
in the back of the head.
In the back of the head like that. He didn't turn around. And if he had turned around, so it's the right side of his head, then Sirhan would have to be to the right of him to get it like that if he turned all the way around. Plus, they did chemical tests on his suit. So there's a chemical burn mark. Someone had to be like an inch away to leave that in his coat.
And so
kind of through the shoulder pad and kind of like the upper neck and then up below the right ear is where he's getting shot.
So who was the person that actually fired the
His name was Thane Eugene Caesar. Nobody called him that. They just called him Gene. But Gene Caesar is the one that did it. He worked for Ace Security. He is all tied up with John Alessio, who's a hardcore mobster that's tied to very wealthy capos, we call them, in the mob in California, and worked with Nixon cronies. And there's even a contract killing discussed between Galente and Hoffa in jail about killing him, and that got shopped around. And I remember William Bailey was the FBI agent's name, by the way, and Baxter Ward was the county supervisor, and they all witnessed the holes in the wall. And I have pictures of it and everything. So yeah, if you look at the physical evidence, you've got the powder burns, you've got the chemical tests, you've got the ballistic tests. Then you also have audio recordings of 13 shots. And that was by Philip von Prague and Robert Joling did audio. And then there was another one done more recently from Wes Dooley and Paul Pegas of Audio Engineering in Pasadena. And they actually were saying at least 13 shots. And what happens is all the screaming and stuff from the crowd gets to where you can't know if there's any more.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 13 bullets. Now, there could be a bullet you didn't find or someone picked it up or whatever. So, but all you need is more than 8. And it's impossible. If you have more than 8, then it cannot only be Sirhan. And one of the most reliable journalists that ever lived, John Pilger,
Right.
was there in the pantry on Sirhan's side of the room. Okay, he's in front of Kennedy, and the man next to him was grazed by a bullet on the arm. And Pilger, I believe him. I mean, that's John Pilger, very super reliable journalist. Also, a guy who worked for CBS News. His name was Don Schulman. So this is a news person who's, has an eye to look for these kind of things. He saw Caesar pull his gun out and fire it. But what he said is Kennedy's bodyguard fired back.
Yeah.
Which is a reasonable assumption. He's a police officer. So he thought, oh, he's shooting at the bad guy. But by most accounts, Sirhan had been tackled after like the third shot. The maitre d', they pushed him over this one of those silver tables, with the food.
Right.
And then on the ground afterward. He's a little guy, and they dogpiled him. But as he fell, you hear pop, 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 and Kennedy falls. And when Kennedy falls, that's when all the women screaming and da-da-da. And there was a woman named Nina Rose Hughes. There's some pictures of her with Robert. And she's just going on memory, like, I heard ta, 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 ta. She's counting the shots. And she told them 12 to 14 shots. They changed her statement to 8 shots, which is really stupid. But this is showing complicity of the LAPD, because you could just say, well, she said she heard 12 to 14, but she could just remember it wrong. You can't just kind of hear audio. She's like, no, it was like fireworks. So it wasn't like bang, bang, bang. There was 2 incidences also where 2 shots were like, ta-ta, where it had to be 2 guns, according to the gun nuts that know about this stuff.
Right.
And so that was Thane and Sirhan shooting like that. So his gun was going. Thane walked into that room holding Robert's right elbow, and he was right behind him like a human shield, because he knows that Sirhan's about to pop out. He didn't want to get shot.
Yeah.
And Sirhan just firing at whatever. He's hitting bystanders mostly. While everyone's looking at him doing that, Thane kills him. And Robert actually ripped the tie off of him. They have clip-on ties because police don't have ties because that you could choke them. But what's next to his hand while he's on the floor, it was like his final signal, like, hey, the cop shot me.
Yeah, and the corruption of the police in both of the Kennedy murders.
Oh yeah.
If the angle that looks like John F. Kennedy was shot on the final fatal headshot, it came from the direction of the Texas jail, which would be 20 degrees off from where.
And Bill Decker, who's the chief of police, who was a frequent, often at the Carousel Club run by Jack Ruby, seeing the hookers, let's just admit it.
Yeah.
And Patrick Dean, who is another, not only to Ruby, but several mob connections, who failed a polygraph test, by the way. He's the one that like, how did Oswald know? How did Ruby know when Oswald was being transferred and where? Like to the second. And so he could go up and shoot him in the stomach. Well, those are your 2 most likely cohorts in the police that would have tipped him off. And it was Dean that was in charge of transferring him. So that's what happened there.
Yeah. And then in the case of Los Angeles, ties into people like Mickey Cohen.
Mickey Cohen ran a gambling operation out of that hotel. He knew William Gardner well. William Gardner ran just the regular hotel security, but none of his guys had guns. They're just in the brown uniforms and pushing people or whatever, but they didn't have guns. That's why they had a security. We're going to have this little private organization, Alessio's guys, and bring them in. So they walked them into a kill zone, but they insisted on, this Patsy's got to be Palestinian for some reason.
Yeah.
And so you look at the conglomerate that Alessio is running, because he ends up being the top shareholder for this thing called Westgate, California, which was, if you know what a zaibatsu is, what the Japanese mafia uses, Yakuza, that was similar to what they were doing in California with a bank and several businesses, giving no interest loans to themselves and loan sharking and da-da-da-da. But Holt Smith and Alessio were running Westgate, California, and they're the ones that hire Ace Security and everything. So the conglomerate that has money from Cohen, as you said, from Modalitz, who's helping procure Bugsy Siegel's old properties with Hank Greenspun, who, if anyone's seen Numek, you all know what Greenspun did in his gun running with Nathan Lift and getting conventional guns to Haganah, the Israeli terrorists that take over Palestine. And so, yeah, they're all in there now. Cohen was in jail when RFK was killed, but he definitely had relationships, and it was just filled in with the next mobster with the Ambassador Hotel. They ran gambling operations out of there, and he ended up getting recommendation. He's also tied to Russ Parsons and Sirhan's lawyers, like Grant Cooper. So as was Alessio. So, yeah.
Yeah, this
Parson wrote a glowing recommendation for Cohen to Cleveland authorities. People don't know Mickey Cohen was he all over the place, but out of Ohio too.
Now you're working right now, putting together a film about the murder assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, correct?
I am. That's also why I didn't tell you who was on Daily Plaza, because I'm like, nah, that's going to be in the movie.
Yeah. Hey, don't.
I worked too long to just fill that out. I'm like, no, it's 100% too. Like I already said, who shot RFK, and it's kind of like, nah. I see, that's what's going to happen when I say what happened to JFK. It won't matter because people are so married to their theories.
Yeah,
I ran into this with 9/11 too. They're just like, it just doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah.
So I want to prove it like 1,000%. I don't want to sloganeer it. I'm going to show you all the evidence. And like with RFK, when you look at the conglomerate, like I was saying, that's paying for all of this, and it's got a lot of Italian and Jewish mobsters. It's like, okay, I mean, the Italians hated him too, for sure.
Yeah. But
the fact that they have a Palestinian patsy lets you know who's in charge of that hit.
Well, yeah, that's why come up with Sirhan Sirhan as a. And in fact, generally, I think he was portrayed as being a Muslim, not a Christian.
And they might have started with that. It doesn't matter what his religion was.
Well, right, but I'm just saying that it feeds into part of that narrative as well. So, look,
and there's this crazy notebook they had where it's like he wrote must assassinate RFK over and over and over again. And he's even stuttering in writing, like, please pay to the order 5. And that is how Hollywood thinks a crazy person is, That's not how schizophrenics or whatever actually are. So that was planted. And I think then all the photos of him, his eyes are all wide and he looks like a nut. If he said anything to anybody, this guy's crazy. You can't listen to him. But he wasn't going to say anything because in addition to that, I didn't talk about it. There's a whole bunch of witnesses and investigators that, one of them's car gets shot up, a woman got stabbed, death threats on the phone, another guy got pistol whipped, and Sirhan's not running around doing all that,
Well, and let's come back again. If Robert F. Kennedy's policy is supporting the right of return for Palestinians, then why does a Palestinian want to kill him? Come on.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, he let him buy a certain number of jets or something, but like, Sirhan didn't know any geopolitics at all.
Yeah.
He really didn't. He said he acts like he can't remember even being there. And it's possible they drugged him out of his mind or whatever. They never did like a toxicology test on him or anything. And they destroyed the evidence. They physically destroyed the panels and things. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of the information they had, it was like 2,400 photographs all over that room. They're gone.
Yeah.
The LAPD destroyed them. Why?
Yeah. Too much uncomfortable evidence.
A lot of that is this guy named Evel Younger. He was a DA, but I mean, it's not like LAPD is some notoriously honest thing even today. You know,
Right.
they worked with Bloods and Crips, and yeah. In fact, the only time they do, I think the APAC was spying on them. Jeff Langford had that case, but yeah, LAPD, all of California, really. I mean, they're all the way to the governor. It's basically legal to just go and steal $900 worth of stuff.
Yeah.
If you're the right color, they just go and steal things. And I think Section 8's theft, and people robbing the trains and taking the mail, and they've had to shut down all these Walgreens and things, and they've had to put stuff behind plexiglass because the cops just don't bother with crime like that. And they've been caught over and over again, like taking drugs out of the evidence room. I mean, they're disgusting.
Yeah, well, we'll see if there is any real release of the Robert F. Kennedy files. Even though
I don't even think they exist.
Yeah,
I think they have been destroyed.
Well, we're coming up
and
on
you see what happens when Nixon gets in. He gets Hoffa out of jail. He got a lot of them out of jail, like hardcore murderers. He let out of jail too.
Yeah,
he's a syndicate guy. And
well, we're coming up on an hour here, so I want to close it out with reminding people that you have a channel that's up on both Twitter and Rumble, correct?
Yeah, the two things I'm allowed on.
Yeah, and
I have a Substack.
Okay,
people can follow that.
They just search for Ryan Dawson on Substack.
It's ryandawson.org.
Okay,
I made a custom URL for it.
I encourage people to take time, go to Rumble, look up NUMEC, NUMEC.
It's free. A lot of work went into that film, I can tell you. It's only like 90 minutes, but it lays out what they did and why they absolutely had to get rid of Kennedy.
Yeah. And
it was an existential threat for Israel.
Looking over at the Shekel chats, Sea Tide says, good conversation. Thanks for your work. No, thanks for the work that you do. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing. That's the only Shekel chat. So we'll get back to it.
The death of John F. Kennedy ultimately led to the death of Robert F. Kennedy.
It did, and they killed him. They killed Martin Luther King a couple months before Robert.
Yeah,
yeah. So, look, they killed a politician in the DRC. The Dulles brothers that's just what they did. They assassinated people in Latin America, Africa, and they had planned to kill Fidel. This is just kind of like now you can just kill people.
Yeah. Been an ugly period. All right, my friend. Hey, Ryan, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Been better if I had been able to read and stuff, but
yeah, well,
that's off the top of my head.
Folks may not be
seconds.
Folks may not be aware, but you're battling macular degeneration, and you're under treatment for it. And I pray a speedy recovery for you.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll work. Dr. Moon said it'll take 3 months, so
okay,
we'll see. We'll see. Totally had a pun intended there.
All right, thanks a lot.
Peace.
I'm sorry we couldn't get Ryan on camera today, but the sensitivity of his eyes prevents him from doing that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It is actually a pretty dark subject matter, but it's true. And we need to take a good hard look at these things. So please, if you enjoyed this conversation, hit the like and subscribe button and tell your friends about Countercurrents.
Yeah. unfortunately, they didn't have it quite